the sommelier at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Geneva, sets down a bottle of Burgundy without showing the label, because the family at table 7 already knows exactly what they ordered, and they ordered it because their grandfather drank it at the same restaurant in 1961, and the vineyard that produced it has been quietly owned by a family in Beaune, whose name appears on no Forbes list, no Instagram account, and no press release of any kind. That is the first thing you need to understand about old money and business. The enterprises that have endured for 3, 4, sometimes 5 generations are not the ones you read about. They are not the ones that announce themselves. They are the ones that operate so smoothly, so quietly that most people never realize they are encountering a business at all. They simply believe they are encountering excellence. And that distinction matters more than almost anything else we discuss on this channel, because it reveals something profound about how wealth actually compounds over time, not through spectacle, but through invisibility. If this kind of content speaks to something you've been quietly searching for, subscribe now. This channel exists for people who want to understand the world behind the world. Now, back to Geneva, back to that bottle of Burgundy. Because the vineyard that produced it is only one example of what we're going to explore today, and the further we go, the more you'll realize that the businesses old money families have quietly maintained for generations share a set of characteristics so consistent, so deliberate, that they almost form a philosophy, almost form a code. The first characteristic you notice once you know what you're looking at is that these businesses are almost never scalable in the modern sense of the word. They are not designed to grow infinitely. They are designed to endure. Consider the private banking families of Zurich and Geneva, not the institutional banks with glass towers and television advertisements, but the smaller, older houses, the ones where the managing partner still knows the first names of every client's children. These firms have, in many cases, managed the same family fortunes for over 100 years. They do not advertise. They do not have a presence on LinkedIn. New clients come only through personal introduction, and personal introduction only happens when someone already inside the circle decides, after considerable reflection, that you belong there. This model would horrify a modern venture capitalist. There is no growth strategy, there's no user acquisition funnel, there is no disruption narrative, and yet these firms have survived 2 world wars, multiple currency collapses, the 2008 financial crisis, and every technological revolution of the last century, while the aggressively scaling competitors around them have, one by one, been absorbed, collapsed, or rendered irrelevant. What the old money families understood, and what took business schools another 100 years to even begin articulating, is that scarcity is not a weakness. Scarcity, when it is genuine and consistent, is the most powerful form of positioning that exists. And the businesses that mastered this did so not as a marketing strategy, but as a reflection of genuine values. They were not pretending to be exclusive. They simply had no interest in being anything else. But the banking houses are only the beginning. And what comes next tells an even more interesting story, because it moves the conversation away from finance entirely and into something far more tactile, far more intimate, and far more surprising. Walk through the 6th arrondissement of Paris on a Tuesday morning, and you will pass a door, unmarked or nearly so, with perhaps a small brass plate bearing only a surname, behind which a family has been producing custom leather goods since the late 19th century. Not handbags for a retail floor, not accessories for a department store concession. Bespoke leatherwork, trunks, document cases, riding equipment, the occasional commission for a saddle that will take 14 months to complete and will cost more than most people's cars. The clients do not browse, they do not compare prices, they call or they write, or if they are very old clients, they simply appear, and the conversation begins where the last one left off, sometimes years prior. This is the second characteristic of the businesses old money families have preserved across generations. They are built around craft so specific and so deep that it cannot be easily replicated, and more importantly, cannot be easily replaced. The family in the 6th arrondissement is not selling leather goods. They are selling the continuation of a relationship that began with a client's great-grandmother, who commissioned a travel trunk before a voyage to Morocco, and whose granddaughter now commissions a document case before posting to Singapore. The object is almost secondary. What is being transacted is trust, layered, inherited, almost ceremonial trust. And this is where it becomes genuinely fascinating, because this same structure appears across industries that seem, on the surface, to have nothing in common. You find it in the small agricultural estates of Tuscany that have produced olive oil for the same network of restaurants and private households for 4 generations, never selling retail, never expanding the grove beyond what the family can personally oversee. You find it in the print and stationery houses of London, particularly in the streets around St. James's, where families have engraved crests, letterheads, and wedding invitations for the same surnames, generation after generation, in a business so quiet that it does not need a sign, because everyone who needs to find it already knows exactly where it is. You find it in the small architectural and restoration firms that work exclusively on historic private estates. Families who have spent decades learning the specific stonework of a particular region, the particular lime mortar of a particular century, the particular way a certain kind of oak ages in a particular climate. These firms are not listed on any general contractor database. They are called upon because someone whose estate was restored by them 30 years ago mentions them, quietly, privately, specifically, to someone whose estate now needs the same care. The pattern, once you see it, is almost impossible to ignore, and it raises a question that gets to the very heart of why these businesses have lasted when so many others have not. A question about what these families understood about value that the rest of the world is only now beginning to learn. There is a wine negociant family in Burgundy, not the vineyard owners mentioned at the opening, but a separate family entirely, which tells you something about how densely layered this world actually is, who have operated from the same address in Beaune since 1887. They do not produce wine. They select it, age it, and allocate it. Their client list has never exceeded 300 households. When a client dies, the allocation does not automatically pass to the heir. The heir must be introduced, must be evaluated, must, in the understated language of that world, demonstrate that the relationship is something they wish to continue rather than simply inherit. That last detail is worth sitting with for a moment because it reveals something about the philosophy underlying all of these businesses that goes far beyond commerce. These families are not simply running enterprises, they are curating communities. They are making quiet, ongoing judgments about who belongs in the world they have built, and those judgments are made not on the basis of wealth, because at this level, wealth is assumed, but on the basis of character, of taste, of what one might call relational seriousness. The willingness to show up, to learn, to engage with the craft or the product or the relationship on its own terms, rather than simply consuming it. This is why new money so often finds these doors closed, and why the closure feels inexplicable. It is not snobbery in the crude sense, it is something more considered than that. A family that has spent 130 years building something of genuine quality has a reasonable interest in ensuring that the people they build it with and for understand what they are participating in. The vetting is not about exclusion for its own sake, it is about preservation. And this brings us to something that rarely gets discussed openly, even in circles where old money is a lived reality rather than an aspiration. The role of discretion as an actual business asset. Not discretion as politeness, not discretion as social nicety, discretion as a structural feature of the enterprise itself, woven into how it operates, how it communicates, how it grows, and crucially, how it does not grow. The private medical practices that have served the same families in London, Paris, and New York for generations operate on this principle absolutely. The physician who has treated 3 generations of the same family knows things, medical, psychological, personal, that represent an almost incomprehensible level of trust. That trust is the product. as much as any diagnosis or treatment, and it is protected with the same seriousness that a Swiss bank protects account information, because everyone involved understands that the moment discretion is compromised, the entire structure collapses. Not just the business, the relationship, the lineage of care, everything. What this means in practice is that these businesses have developed an almost instinctive allergy to visibility, and that allergy is not incidental, it is load-bearing. There is a particular kind of conversation that happens at dinner parties in the Hamptons, in drawing rooms in Edinburgh, in the quieter corners of galas in Milan, that the uninitiated almost always misread. Someone mentions a name, a firm, a family, an estate, and the people around the table respond not with questions but with recognition. A slight nod, a murmured agreement, perhaps a brief exchange of specific detail that signals first-hand experience. And then the conversation moves on. No elaboration, no explanation for the benefit of those at the table who did not recognize the name. That moment, that small, unhurried exchange, is how these businesses are sustained across generations, not through advertising, not through reputation management or brand strategy, through the living transmission of trust between people who have earned the right to transmit it. The recommendation is never loud. It is never enthusiastic in the performative sense. It is delivered with the quiet certainty of someone sharing something they consider obvious to someone they consider worthy of knowing it. This is a social skill as much as a business model, and it is one that takes generations to develop because it requires a particular kind of confidence. Not the confidence of someone who needs to impress, but the confidence of someone who simply knows. Knows the quality, knows the history, knows that the thing they are recommending will speak entirely for itself, and that their role is merely to open the door. Understanding how that kind of endorsement actually works, how it is delivered, how it lands, how it differs from ordinary recommendation in both tone and effect, is something I have seen explored most precisely in the Social Intelligence Guide, which breaks down the unspoken dynamics of exactly these kinds of high-context conversations and how to navigate them with genuine fluency rather than imitation. If this world is one you are moving into or deepening your understanding of, it is worth your time. But the social mechanics of recommendation are only one layer of what keeps these businesses alive. Because underneath the introductions, underneath the dinner table conversations and the quiet nods of recognition, there is something more structural, more deliberate, and in many ways more surprising. Something these families do internally within the business itself that almost no outside observer ever thinks to examine. The thing that sustains a family business across 3 generations is not the product, and it is not the client list. It is the way the family transmits the values that made the business worth building in the first place. And that transmission almost never happens formally. Children in these families grow up inside the business in the most literal sense. They sit in the corner of the room while appointments are taken. They accompany a parent to a client meeting not to participate, but to observe. They learn before they learn anything else that the way you greet someone who has been coming to this firm for 40 years is different from the way you greet a new introduction. Not because one matters more, but because each relationship carries its own history, its own texture, its own set of unspoken understandings that must be honored rather than reset. This is an education in human attention that no institution can replicate because it cannot be codified. It is absorbed through proximity, through repetition, through years of quiet presence in rooms where things of consequence are happening without announcement. And this produces something that most modern business culture finds genuinely difficult to understand: a firm that is not optimized, not efficient in the contemporary sense. A house that takes 14 months to complete a commission, that will not accept a new client without personal introduction, that spends 20 minutes discussing a single harvest with someone who has been buying from the family for 3 decades, is leaving money on the table by every conventional metric. The families who run these firms know this. They have always known it. They simply do not consider it a problem because what they are optimizing for does not appear on a balance sheet. They are optimizing for a quality of experience so consistent and so specific that it becomes, over time, genuinely irreplaceable. You cannot disrupt a business whose clients have no desire to be disrupted. Disruption requires dissatisfaction, and these clients are not dissatisfied. They are loyal in the truest sense, not out of habit, but out of a repeatedly renewed conviction that nothing else available to them comes close. What these families understood, and what the broader culture is only beginning to absorb, is that restraint itself is a form of power, that refusing to be everywhere, refusing to scale, refusing to make yourself easy to find, creates a gravitational pull that no marketing budget can manufacture. When something is genuinely rare and genuinely the product of a specific family's specific knowledge accumulated over a specific century, the right people will always find it. They always have. And the families who built these businesses understood something else too. That the moment you begin trying to make yourself easier to find, you have already begun to lose the thing that made you worth finding.